Danielle Carter was driving home on a quiet Friday evening after a long day at work. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft orange and pink colors. She had just finished a difficult meeting in the city where she worked as a federal prosecutor. Her job was not easy. She spent her days fighting tough criminal cases and trying to make the world a safer place. But tonight, she felt tired, ready to relax with her family. As she drove through a small town on the outskirts of the city, her mind was still busy with the case she was preparing. She barely noticed the stop sign ahead. She slowed down, but didn't come to a complete stop. It was a moment's mistake, something many people do without thinking. But for a police officer sitting nearby, it was enough to pull her over. The police car's flashing lights appeared behind her, and she calmly pulled to the side of the road. She turned off her engine and waited. The officer, a white man named Officer James Miller, walked up to her window. He looked at her with a serious face. "License and registration, please," he said in a sharp tone. Danielle reached into her bag, pulled out her driver's license and the car's papers, and handed them over. The officer studied them for a moment, then looked back at her. "You rolled through the stop sign back there," he said. "That's a traffic violation." Danielle nodded. "Yes, I'm sorry. I should have stopped fully." Officer Miller's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you know how dangerous that is? You could have caused an accident." "I understand," Danielle replied politely. "I will be more careful." He went back to his car to run her information through the system. Danielle sat quietly, watching the road and the fading daylight. After a few minutes, the officer returned with a small piece of paper. "This is a citation," he said, handing it to her. "You'll need to appear in court before Judge Halbrook next week. If you don't show up, the fine will be doubled." Danielle looked at the paper. The fine was higher than she expected for a stop sign violation. She was not someone who liked trouble, but she wanted to appear in court to explain the situation. "Thank you, officer," she said calmly. "I will be there." As Officer Miller walked back to his car, Danielle started to think about the upcoming court appearance. She knew Judge Richard Halbrook was a local judge known for being tough, especially with minor offenses. Some people called him strict. Others said he was old-fashioned. Danielle wasn't worried, but she knew it would be important to stay respectful and professional. The next few days passed quickly. Danielle continued her work as a federal prosecutor, preparing documents and meeting witnesses. She couldn't stop thinking about the traffic stop. Although it was a small thing, the way the officer had spoken to her felt a little different. There was a sharpness in his voice, a sense of judgment beyond the traffic violation. She wondered if it was because she was a black woman alone on that road. When the day of the court appearance arrived, Danielle dressed carefully in a simple business suit. She wanted to look professional, but she also wanted to blend in with the other people who would be there for their tickets and fines. She carried a small folder with her papers and left her house early so she could arrive on time. The courthouse was an old brick building with large columns at the entrance. Inside, it smelled faintly of dust and polished wood. The waiting room was crowded with people from the town, drivers who had been caught speeding, parking illegally, or making small mistakes like Danielle. Some chatted quietly, others stared at the floor, and a few looked nervously at the judge's door. Danielle found a seat near the back and waited patiently. The courtroom clerk called names one by one. Some people came up, paid their fines, and left quickly. Others talked to the judge, hoping for a lighter punishment. When Danielle's name was called, she stood up and walked confidently to the front. Judge Halbrook was a white man in his 60s with a stern face and thick glasses. He looked at her briefly and then back at his papers. "You're here for a rolling stop," he said without emotion. "Is that correct?" Danielle nodded. "Yes, Your Honor," the judge sighed. "This court takes traffic laws seriously. It's important that everyone follows the rules. Otherwise, accidents happen." Danielle agreed silently but noticed the tone of his voice. It was not just about the law. There was something harsher there, like a lecture meant to teach a lesson. "Do you have any reason why you did not come to a complete stop?" the judge asked. Danielle answered honestly. "No, sir. It was a mistake. I will be more careful in the future." Judge Halbrook looked at her for a moment, then said, "I'm going to impose a fine of $300. That should remind you to pay attention to the law." Danielle was surprised. The usual fine for this kind of violation was much lower. She glanced around the courtroom but saw no one else being fined that much. "I understand, Your Honor," she replied. "May I ask why the fine is so high?" The judge's eyes narrowed. "That's the court's decision." Danielle felt a quiet frustration. It seemed unfair, but she kept her voice calm. She didn't want to argue, especially not in that small courtroom where the judge clearly held the power. As she turned to leave, she overheard a few whispered comments from people sitting nearby. Some were looking at her with surprise, others with disapproval. It felt like more than just a traffic violation. It felt like a moment where the judge was sending a message she couldn't quite understand. Outside the courtroom, Danielle took a deep breath. She had experienced many challenges in her life and career, but this situation was different. It was a reminder that no matter how much she achieved, people sometimes made assumptions based on her appearance and her race. She knew she could pay the fine and move on, but she also felt the need to stand up for herself. She decided she would return to court to explain who she really was. Not as a defendant, but as someone who understood the law deeply, and someone who expected to be treated with respect. Driving home, Danielle thought about the work she had done as a federal prosecutor. She had faced dangerous criminals and complex cases, but this small-town court felt like an entirely different world. It was a world where her identity mattered more than her achievements, where the color of her skin seemed to influence how she was judged. She promised herself that when she returned to that courtroom, she would do so with confidence and dignity. She would show Judge Halbrook that behind the simple appearance of a woman pulled over for a traffic stop was a strong, capable person who fought for justice every day. As the sun set and the stars began to shine, Danielle felt a mix of determination and quiet hope. This was just the beginning of a story much bigger than a traffic ticket. It was a story about respect, fairness, and the courage to face prejudice, not with anger, but with calm strength. The day Danielle Carter was scheduled to appear in court arrived. She woke up early, feeling calm but focused. She dressed carefully, choosing a navy blue business suit that was simple yet professional. She wanted to look the part, not just as someone attending court for a minor traffic violation, but as a woman who knew her worth and would not be overlooked. She left her home early to make sure she arrived on time. The small courthouse sat quietly in the early morning light, its brick walls casting long shadows on the pavement. Danielle took a deep breath as she walked inside. The air smelled faintly of old books and polished wood. The courthouse was all ready, filling with people, men and women, young and old, all waiting to have their cases heard. Most of these people were ordinary citizens who had been caught for small mistakes like parking too long, speeding, or not stopping at stop signs. Danielle took a seat near the back of the courtroom, folding her hands in her lap. She watched as one by one people were called forward, paying their fines or talking briefly to the judge. The judge was a tall, stern-looking man named Richard Halbrook. He wore a black robe and thick glasses that sat low on his nose. His face showed years of experience, but also a kind of coldness that made people uneasy. Danielle had heard stories about him from friends, how he was strict, didn't like to waste time, and wasn't easily impressed. She was determined to face him calmly and respectfully. When her name was finally called, Danielle stood and walked to the front of the courtroom. The judge looked at her briefly, then back down at his papers without saying a word. The clerk handed Danielle's citation to the judge, who scanned it quickly. "You're here for rolling through a stop sign," Judge Halbrook said without any warmth in his voice. "Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Danielle replied clearly. The judge didn't ask any more questions. Instead, he began talking to her in a tone that was sharp and almost harsh. This court is here to enforce the law. Everyone must understand the importance of following traffic rules. If people don't obey these laws, accidents happen. People can get hurt or killed. Danielle nodded silently. She understood the seriousness, but she also knew the judge was not just talking about the law. There was something more, a judgment based on how she looked, how she spoke, maybe even her skin color. The judge seemed to be assuming things about her life, her job, and her character. "Are you employed?" the judge asked suddenly. Danielle was caught off guard by the question. It wasn't related to the case, but she answered politely, "Yes, Your Honor, I am a federal prosecutor." The judge's eyebrows raised slightly, but he did not show much reaction. Instead, he turned back to his papers and said, "A fine of $300 will be imposed. That should serve as a reminder to take the law seriously." Danielle was surprised again. This fine was much higher than the usual amount for such a minor violation. She glanced around the courtroom, noticing that others had smaller fines or only warnings. It seemed like she was being treated differently. "Your Honor," Danielle said softly, "may I ask why the fine is higher than usual?" The judge looked at her sharply. "That is the court's discretion." The tone of his voice was final. Danielle could feel a quiet tension in the room. Some of the people waiting looked over at her, whispering quietly to each other. She realized the judge's words were not just about the traffic stop, they were about her as a person. Still, Danielle kept her composure. She had faced difficult moments before, cross-examining witnesses, standing firm in the face of injustice, but this felt different. It was a small courtroom in a small town, where the power belonged to the judge and no one else. Yet, she knew she could not let this moment pass without standing up for herself. When the judge continued to lecture her about personal responsibility and setting an example, Danielle listened patiently. She thought about the years she had spent working hard to become a federal prosecutor, the countless hours of study, and the difficult cases she had handled. None of that mattered here. At least, that's what the judge seemed to think. After the judge finished, Danielle was ready to leave. But before she could walk away, she took a breath and spoke again. This time, her voice was calm but strong. "Your Honor, I respect the court and the law. But I want to remind everyone here that justice must be fair to all people, regardless of their race or background." The courtroom grew quiet. The judge looked at her, surprised by her words. People sitting nearby turned to listen. Danielle continued, "I made a mistake, and I accept responsibility. But I also ask that the court recognize who I am and treat me with fairness and respect." Judge Holbrook cleared his throat. "Court is adjourned." As Danielle left the courtroom, she could feel the eyes of the people around her. Some looked supportive, others doubtful. But she knew she had made a quiet statement that day. A statement about dignity, fairness, and the right to be treated equally. Outside, the air was cool and fresh. Danielle took a deep breath and felt a mix of emotions. She was proud of herself for standing up, but she also knew this was only the beginning. The experience had shown her how much work still needed to be done to fight bias and injustice, even in places where the law should be blind. As she walked to her car, she thought about the power of the courtroom, the power to decide someone's fate, sometimes based on little more than assumptions. She promised herself that she would return stronger and ready to face whatever came next. This was not just about a traffic ticket anymore. It was about challenging old ideas, breaking down walls, and demanding respect in a world that too often judged people by the color of their skin instead of their character. Danielle started her car and drove away, feeling more determined than ever. The road ahead might be difficult, but she was ready to travel it with courage and grace. The day of Danielle Carter's second court appearance came much sooner than anyone expected. Word about her case had quietly spread through the courthouse, and many people were curious about the woman who had spoken up so calmly in a room usually filled with silence and quick decisions. Some whispered that she might be important, though few really knew the truth. But Danielle knew exactly why she was there. She was determined to show the judge, and everyone present, that she was not just a name on a traffic ticket, but a person of substance and strength. That morning, Danielle dressed with care. She wore a dark, tailored suit, crisp white shirt, and simple but elegant jewelry. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She wanted to look confident, professional, and above all, calm. She wasn't here to fight with anger or hostility. She was here to make a point with dignity and clarity. When she arrived at the courthouse, the waiting room was unusually crowded. People who had come for other cases glanced at her as she walked in. Some gave polite nods, others watched silently, unsure of what to expect. Danielle sat quietly, folding her hands on her lap, preparing herself for the moment ahead. Inside the courtroom, Judge Richard Halbrook was already seated, looking as stern and unyielding as ever. His glasses rested low on his nose, and he shuffled some papers without much expression. The courtroom was filled with the usual mix of locals and a few curious onlookers. The air was thick with anticipation. When Danielle's name was called, she stood slowly, steadying her nerves. As she walked to the front, she felt the weight of many eyes upon her. She looked directly at the judge and spoke with a calm but firm voice. "Your Honor, I am here today to clarify the situation and provide some important information." The judge raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Danielle reached into her bag and pulled out a thin, official-looking folder. She opened it carefully and took out a card, placing it gently on the judge's bench. "This is my identification as a federal prosecutor," she said. "I work for the Department of Justice. I prosecute serious criminal cases on behalf of the United States government." The judge blinked, adjusting his glasses as he looked at the card. The courtroom fell silent. Some people whispered softly, others stared in disbelief. "Are you saying you are employed by the federal government?" Judge Halbrook asked, his voice quieter now. "Yes, Your Honor," Danielle replied. "I handle complex criminal cases that affect public safety across the country." The judge's expression changed from cold judgment to one of surprise. It was clear he had made an assumption about her before knowing anything about her background. Danielle continued, "I understand the importance of obeying traffic laws, and I accept responsibility for my mistake. However, I hope the court recognizes that I am a professional who upholds the law every day. I respectfully request that this be taken into consideration." The courtroom remained still. The judge looked down at the card again, then back at Danielle. His voice softened. "I was not aware of your position. This changes the context." Danielle nodded slightly. "Thank you, Your Honor." There was a moment of pause as Judge Halbrook seemed to gather his thoughts. Then he cleared his throat. "Given this new information, I will reconsider the fine imposed," he said slowly. "This court strives to be fair to all citizens." Danielle's heart beat steadily. She felt a quiet satisfaction, not because she wanted special treatment, but because she wanted fairness. She wanted the judge and the court to realize that justice must apply equally to everyone, regardless of their race, background, or appearance. The judge then formally vacated the earlier fine and dismissed the citation. The courtroom murmured. Some nodded approvingly. Others whispered about the surprising turn of events. As Danielle gathered her things, the judge said quietly, "I apologize if my previous decision seemed harsh. It was not my intention to cause offense." Danielle smiled gently. "Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate your consideration." As she left the courtroom, she noticed several people looking at her with newfound respect. Some approached to quietly express their support or curiosity. The bailiff nodded at her with a small smile. Outside, the sun shone brightly and the air felt lighter. Danielle breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the moment lift. But she also knew that this was more than just about one fine or one judge's mistake. It was about a larger issue, the way assumptions and bias could affect even the smallest moments of justice. Driving away, Danielle thought about the challenges faced by many people who never got the chance to explain themselves. How often were they judged unfairly? How often did the color of their skin or their appearance change the way they were treated? She also thought about her own journey, the long hours of study, the determination to serve justice, and the quiet strength she had developed over the years. Today had tested that strength in a new way. Her phone buzzed as she drove. A message from a colleague read, "Saw what happened in court today. Proud of you. Keep fighting." Danielle smiled to herself. This was not just a personal victory. It was a step toward something bigger. A reminder that fairness and respect must be demanded, not quietly hoped for. That evening, she reflected on the day. She knew the judge had learned something important. Too, something about respect, humility, and the dangers of making quick assumptions. But she also knew that changing minds and hearts was a slow process. Danielle felt more motivated than ever. She would continue her work, both in the courtroom and beyond, to challenge injustice and promote fairness. She believed in the power of law, but also in the power of courage and dignity. Her story was becoming a quiet example for others, a story about standing tall, speaking clearly, and never letting prejudice define one's path. As night fell, Danielle prepared for the days ahead. There would be more cases, more challenges, and more moments where she would need to be strong. But she was ready, because justice was not just her job, it was her mission. After the surprising turn of events in the courtroom, Danielle Carter felt a mixture of relief and resolve. The dismissal of her fine was not just a personal win, it was a reminder of the importance of standing up for oneself and speaking the truth, even when it seemed difficult or uncomfortable. But she also knew that her story was not over. There were still many challenges ahead, both in the courtroom and beyond. In the days that followed, Danielle returned to her usual work with a renewed sense of purpose. Her job as a federal prosecutor was demanding, often involving long hours, detailed investigations, and the pressure of making decisions that could affect people's lives deeply. She worked on cases involving serious crimes, fraud, drug trafficking, and violent offenses. It was a world far removed from a small-town traffic court, but the lessons she learned there stayed with her. One afternoon, after a long meeting at the office, Danielle's phone rang. It was her close friend and colleague, Marcus. Marcus was someone she trusted deeply, a fellow attorney who understood the challenges she faced both professionally and personally. "Danielle, I heard about what happened with the judge," Marcus said warmly. "That was impressive. Not many people have the courage to speak up like you did." Danielle smiled softly. "Thanks, Marcus. It was tough, but necessary. I want to make sure that fairness isn't just a word. It's something real, something people experience every day," Marcus agreed. "You're right. And sometimes, small moments like these can lead to bigger changes. People listen when someone stands strong with dignity." Their conversation reminded Danielle that she was not alone in this fight. Many people in the legal system and in society at large wanted justice to be truly equal. But the road to change was often slow and filled with obstacles. That evening, Danielle sat at her kitchen table thinking about the experience. She remembered the judge's initial harshness and the whispered comments in the courtroom. She remembered how it felt to be judged not for her actions, but for assumptions made about her because of her race and appearance. She thought about the countless others who did not have her education, her job, or her voice. How many people were treated unfairly every day simply because of who they were? How many had no chance to explain themselves, no way to be heard? These questions troubled her deeply. Danielle realized that her experience was just a small example of a much larger problem, one that affected millions of people across the country. Determined to do more, Danielle began to look for ways to use her position as a federal prosecutor to promote fairness and equality. She started by speaking with colleagues and community leaders. sharing her story and encouraging discussions about bias in the legal system. She also began volunteering with local organizations that worked to support people who faced discrimination or unfair treatment. She attended community meetings, talked with young people, and listened carefully to their stories. Through these interactions, Danielle learned even more about the challenges people faced, challenges that went beyond the courtroom and into everyday life. She heard stories of lost jobs, broken families, and dreams delayed because of prejudice. But she also heard stories of hope, resilience, and courage. People who refused to be defined by their circumstances, who fought for their rights and the rights of others. Inspired by these stories, Danielle decided to take her efforts further. She spoke at conferences, wrote articles, and participated in panels about justice reform and equality. She wanted to use her voice to help create a future where everyone was treated fairly, regardless of their background. At work, Danielle also pushed for training programs that would help law enforcement officers and court staff understand the importance of fairness and respect. She believed that education was a key step toward changing attitudes and behaviors. Of course, the work was not easy. Danielle faced resistance from some people who didn't want to acknowledge the problem or who felt threatened by change. She encountered skepticism and sometimes outright hostility. But she remained steady. She knew that change rarely came quickly or easily. It took patience, persistence, and a willingness to keep moving forward, even when progress seemed slow. One day, Danielle received an invitation from the judge who had initially fined her. Judge Halbrook asked to meet with her privately to discuss their courtroom encounter and share his thoughts. Curious but cautious, Danielle agreed. When they met, the judge spoke honestly. He admitted that he had judged her too quickly and that he had never realized the impact his assumptions could have. He thanked her for speaking up and said that her courage had made him reconsider his approach to cases. This conversation was important for Danielle. It showed that even those who held power could learn and grow when given the chance. It also reinforced her belief in the power of dialogue and understanding. As the months passed, Danielle continued her work with determination. She balanced her demanding job with community involvement, always keeping in mind the lessons she had learned from her own experience. Her story also began to inspire others. Young people in her community saw her as a role model, someone who had faced unfairness but refused to be defeated. Colleagues admired her courage and commitment to justice. Danielle's journey reminded everyone that justice was not just about laws and rules, but about people, about respect, dignity, and fairness. One evening, as Danielle prepared to leave her office, she received a message from a young woman she had met at a community event. "Thank you for sharing your story," the message said. "You gave me hope that I can stand up for myself, too." Danielle smiled and replied, "Never be afraid to speak your truth. Your voice matters." As she turned off the lights and stepped outside into the cool night air, Danielle felt a deep sense of peace. Her experience with the traffic ticket had been difficult, but it had also opened a door to greater understanding, courage, and change. She knew the road ahead would still have challenges, but she was ready. Because justice was not just a job for Danielle, it was her passion, her mission, and her way of making the world a better place. After months of hard work and reflection, Danielle Carter's story had grown beyond just a simple traffic ticket and a courtroom confrontation. It had become a symbol of courage, fairness, and the ongoing fight against prejudice. But Danielle knew that the journey toward true justice was never over. Every day brought new challenges and new opportunities to make a difference. Her work as a federal prosecutor continued to be demanding. She spent long hours reviewing case files, preparing for trials, and working closely with law enforcement officers. Her role involved making difficult decisions that affected the lives of many people, sometimes victims, sometimes defendants. Danielle approached her work with seriousness and integrity, always trying to balance the need for justice with fairness and compassion. But the experience she had with Judge Halbrook stayed with her. It reminded her that even within the justice system, bias and misunderstanding could exist, and that it was up to people like her to challenge these issues whenever they appeared. Danielle also found herself becoming more involved outside the courtroom. She had started attending local schools and community centers, speaking to students and young adults about the importance of education, perseverance, and standing up for what is right. She shared her own story honestly, hoping to inspire others who might face unfair treatment or feel powerless. One afternoon, she was invited to speak at a large conference on justice reform. The room was packed with lawyers, judges, activists, and community leaders from around the country. Danielle stood at the podium, looking out over the audience. She took a deep breath and began to speak. She told the story of the day she was fined, unfairly, and how standing up with dignity had changed everything. She spoke about the power of fairness, the importance of recognizing bias, and the need for courage in the face of injustice. Her words were met with applause and nods of agreement. People came up afterward to thank her and share their own experiences. Danielle felt a deep sense of connection. She was part of a larger movement, a wave of change sweeping across the country. Back in her hometown, Danielle continued to build relationships with community leaders and organizations working toward equality. She helped organize workshops for police officers on cultural sensitivity and implicit bias, hoping to create a more understanding and respectful environment for everyone. One day, she received a letter from a young woman named Jasmine. Jasmine had been stopped by police several times and felt scared and powerless. After hearing Danielle speak at a local event, she had found the courage to reach out. In her letter, Jasmine wrote about her fears and her hopes. She asked for advice on how to stay strong and protect her rights. Danielle wrote back, offering encouragement and guidance. She invited Jasmine to meet her at a community center where they could talk more. Their meeting was powerful. Jasmine shared her experiences, and Danielle listened carefully. She offered advice on how to stay calm, know one's rights, and seek help when needed. Jasmine left feeling stronger and more hopeful. These personal connections were deeply meaningful. To Danielle, they reminded her that justice was not just about laws. It was about people, about lives changed by respect and understanding. As time went on, Danielle's efforts began to have a broader impact. She worked with lawmakers to promote policies that addressed racial bias and supported fair treatment in the justice system. She testified before committees, sharing her experiences and urging for change. Her work was recognized by her peers and by national organizations. She received awards for her dedication to justice and equality, but Danielle remained humble. For her, the real reward was seeing progress, small steps that added up to a better future. One evening, Danielle received an unexpected call from Judge Halbrook. He wanted to invite her to speak at a judicial conference about her experiences and the lessons learned. Danielle agreed. When the day came, she stood before an audience of judges and legal professionals. She spoke honestly about bias, assumptions, and the importance of fairness in every decision. She urged them to listen, learn, and be open to change. The response was encouraging. Several judges approached her afterward to thank her for her courage and to discuss ways to improve their own courts. Danielle realized that her story had come full circle. What had started as a personal challenge had grown into a wider conversation, one that was opening doors and changing minds. Despite all the recognition and progress, Danielle remained grounded. She knew the fight for justice was ongoing. Every case, every interaction, was an opportunity to make a difference. She continued to work hard, both in the courtroom and in the community. She mentored young lawyers, encouraging them to be fearless advocates for fairness. She supported programs that helped underprivileged youth find their voice and their future. Her own life was busy but fulfilling. She balanced work with family and friends, always making time for those who mattered most. Looking back, Danielle felt proud but never complacent. She understood that change required persistence and patience. It required courage to speak out and the humility to keep learning. Her experience with Judge Halbrook was a powerful reminder that everyone deserved respect and fairness. It was a story she would carry with her always, a story that inspired her to keep fighting for justice, one person at a time. As the years passed, Danielle's impact continued to grow. She helped create new programs, influenced important policies, and inspired countless people with her example. Her journey showed that even small moments, like standing up in a courtroom, could lead to great change. That fairness and courage could break down barriers and build a better world. And through it all, Danielle remained true to herself, strong, kind, and determined to make a difference wherever she could.